A lot to get to this morning. We're going to start, though, with the latest in the disappearance of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, who walked into Saudi Arabia's consulate in Turkey on October 2nd and has not been seen since. Turkish President Erdogan says investigators found, quote, toxic material at the consulate and that parts had just been repainted, while Turkey's foreign minister said police planned to search the home of the Saudi consul general after that official suddenly left the country, and several Saudi diplomatic vehicles. And the AP reports surveillance video shows the vehicles traveling to the consul general's residence shortly after Khashoggi entered the consulate. This as Turkish officials provided NBC News with the photo and bio pages of 7 Saudi passports belonging to members of the 15-person Saudi hit team they believe is responsible. While the New York Times identifies one of the suspects, claiming he has been a frequent companion of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, seen with him in Paris, Madrid, and around the United States. The Times reports cites witness and records to link 3 others to the Crown Prince's security detail, as well as an autopsy expert said to hold senior positions in Saudi Arabia's Interior Ministry and its medical establishment. In All, the Times says it has independently confirmed that at least 9 of the 15 worked for the Saudi government. So many questions being raised here, Willie.
And with all that in mind, the President of the United States appears to be defending the Saudi Arabian side. In an Oval Office interview with the Associated Press yesterday, President Trump said this, spoke to the Crown Prince. He said he and his father knew nothing about it, and that was very important. I spoke to the King yesterday, the Crown Prince today, wanting to know what was going on, what was happening. And he said very strongly that he and his father knew nothing about it. The AP then asked if during that conversation whether his remarks about, quote, rogue killers came up. The president replied this way. Well, the concept of it, I guess. Yesterday, when I spoke with the father, not so much today, but when I spoke to the father, it just sounded to me like he felt like he did not do it. He did not know about it. And it sounded like, you know, the concept of rogue killers. But I don't know. That was just from my feeling of the conversation with the king. On the idea of trusting the Saudis, the president said, well, I think we have to find out what happened first. You know, here we go again with, you know, you're guilty until proven innocent. I don't like that. We just went through that with Justice Kavanaugh, and he was innocent all the way. So I was unconcerned. But I will say they were very strong in their denial about themselves knowing. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met yesterday in Riyadh with King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who was suspected of personally ordering the operation to lure Khashoggi from his home in Virginia to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you for hosting me. That's a show of Saudi Arabia. They are really strong and old allies. So we face lots of challenges together in the past and today also more. Absolutely.
Did they say that Mr. Khashoggi is alive or dead?
I don't want to talk about any of the facts. They didn't want to either, in that they want to have the opportunity to complete this investigation in a thorough way.
Jeffrey Grover, what do you think as you look at that image of the Secretary of State smiling next to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who has now been credibly accused of ordering the murder of a Washington Post columnist?
Where to begin with all this? First, by the way, can I say that I'm sure Brett Kavanaugh is not thrilled to be equated with the Saudi secret police, but we'll put that aside for a second. Look, let's be real here. We have allies around the world. Our allies sometimes do terrible things, as our adversaries also do. So this is more baroque than usual, but it's not of a different order entirely. I think what's going on is this. Mike Pompeo is the lead figure in the administration's effort to contain and isolate Iran. This Saudi operation in Turkey could ruin all of their best laid plans to essentially destroy or undermine the Iranian economy. And I think Pompeo there smiling, he's smiling for a reason. They need the Saudis desperately to engage in this plan. Saudi Arabia has to keep the oil flowing if Iran's oil gets cut off. And so this is realpolitik at its most real.
So the cost, Jeff, of this plan for Iran is if a journalist is murdered, a resident of Virginia, a Washington Post columnist, so be it?
It seems that way so far, unless the administration changes its tune. But it seems as if the president is desperate to move past this, and obviously this whole OJ, if they did it sort of thing, is part of that. It seems as if they won't be able to do that entirely because this episode is so horrific and so baroque and so horrible that the world is. I think there's physical repulsion.
Yeah,
that people
but
are feeling.
to your point, like Saudi Arabia has been involved in what is essentially a humanitarian disaster in Yemen, and we've been utterly comfortable with.
Saudi Arabia has never been Sweden. I mean,
and so we're comfortable with that. This obviously hits at a more visceral level because, first of all, it's one of our own, but also it's
Bone saws.
Yeah, bone saws. It's a basically murder plot.
You know that there's Russians sitting somewhere going, boy, it took 15 guys with a bone saw to do this. We do this with two guys in a park. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
But if this is all true, they killed the guy in the one place where they had no deniability. It's unbelievable in so many ways.
Doris, our friend Richard Haas, the Council on Foreign Relations, tweeted about the old trust but verify Reagan doctrine and becoming trust but look away, trust and look away when you look at the president saying, well, Russia says it didn't interfere. Well, Kim Jong-un says he's going to denuclearize. Well, the Crown Prince says he did not order the killing of Jamal Khashoggi.
I don't think we can look away from this because of the image, which will forever be burned in our mind. Not only that he was a Washington Post reporter, but we watched him go into that place and never come out. That somehow we can imagine what might have happened. Sometimes pictures make something more visceral, the word you use, than an abstract human rights. It was already wrong the way the president talked about, we're getting billions of dollars, so it's okay that human rights is violated. But now you think about those pictures that made a difference. The little girl who was running down the street after napalm bombing in Vietnam, the person falling out of the World Trade Center, made all those killings real. There's a sense in which when you see an image of something, it somehow gets into your heart and soul. And I don't think we're going to forget this unless we're on overload. I mean, that's the problem. Those other images made such a difference. Even in World War II, they never showed a dead soldier until finally 1943. And even then, that soldier was sleeping because somehow it made real hundreds of thousands of people that were dying around the world. This has become real. It's every kid's fear. Somebody goes away and doesn't come back. And so I think this is going to be harder for them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jeffrey Goldberg, you see private companies pulling away from the Saudis. You see them stepping up. But what we have right now is President Trump on the international world stage lying about financial ties with Saudi Arabia, saying to the Saudis, in essence, he's with them. He doesn't know if he was murdered or not. He doesn't necessarily distrust them. He might trust them. He's playing both sides on the international stage, clearly siding almost with the Saudis. He's appearing weak, feckless, and easily manipulated. We all know that, but I feel like some might argue that this is a massive fail on the Secretary of State's part, that he needed to step up and have some strong language there. I mean, if members of this administration are going to fill the void that this president clearly puts out there, then do it. Are they going to let President Trump bring us down internationally? And isn't that what we are seeing here?
You know, I would take a slightly different tack than this, and I'm trying to view it from the Middle East out rather than from Washington or New York in. And what I mean by that is the following. Remember, the Arabs, the so-called moderate Arabs, never forgave Barack Obama for what they saw as cutting loose Hosni Mubarak, the leader of Egypt. What's happening right now across the Middle East is people are looking at Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo and said, these guys have our back no matter what. That's what a friend does. That's what an ally does. I'm not sure this is being interpreted as weak and feckless in the Middle East. It's being interpreted as these are the rules. This is not a happy place. This is not a friendly place. It's a brutal place. And sometimes we go a little bit too far, and we get into a little bit too much trouble, but the President of the United States, our historic ally, has our back. They are thanking God right now that they have Donald Trump and not Barack Obama.
This is the business we've chosen.
This is the business. Look, this is straight mafia. I mean, you know, what's going on here is straight mafia.
I do think we need to just address one other component that's sort of this weird elephant in the room here, which is we have the opaqueness of the Trump financial records that could be coloring a lot of this. We do not know the extent to which he and his family have financial ties to the Saudis. We do not know the extent to which Kushner and his family have financial ties to the Saudis. I'm not saying this is determinative. I actually am with Jeffrey. I think they've put a huge geopolitical investment on the Saudis, and that's probably what's playing out right here, which is they can't undo that. But I do think that it is probably affecting some of the president's reactions to this. It certainly explains why he was preemptively talking about how he doesn't have any financial ties to the Saudis, even though there is a public paper trail showing that he does.
So, Jeffrey, it sounds like what you're saying is this is sort of baked in and that the president is making perhaps a cynical but a smart political play. I mean, when Doris talks about images, rightly talking about images, there are plenty of images of the famine in Yemen. There are plenty of images of civilian children killed on school buses in the Saudi-led American-backed war there. But the president has made a calculation that his relationship with Saudi Arabia is more important than the life of this journalist.
The president has two things going for him. One, our attention span and overload, as you talk about. There's the hope that in another week or two or three or four, maybe the Washington Post will get off its campaign or something like that.
Another new scandal.
We'll go to the next scandal. I mean, this is a sui generis scandal. This is a really kind of crazy scandal, obviously, compared to most scandals that we deal with. And the second thing he has going for him is that Saudi Arabia's enemies are just as terrible in their human rights behaviors and in their non-adherence to democratic norms and the rule of law. We're talking about Iran and Qatar. Turkey jails more journalists than any other country. So this is the Middle East we're talking about, and so he's picked you can say he's picked the terrible Middle East country that happens to like us. Rather than the terrible Middle East country that doesn't like us. And that he has going long-term in his favor.
What's interesting, Bob Costa, is, though, you have congressional Republicans, senators like Lindsey Graham, saying pretty clearly on television, on Fox News and other places, that if the president won't act on this, Congress will, that they are outraged by this, even if the president is not. What does that mean? What does that turn into? What is that action, potentially?
Well, it's a complicated moment politically for the Republican Party. Talking to my top sources last night, Willie, they said this is perhaps the real October surprise, not the Kavanaugh confirmation, and that you have human rights and foreign policy being now injected into the midterm campaign just weeks ahead of the election. And most of these lawmakers are now back home in their districts trying to save their seats, whether it's in the Senate or the House. And they're really looking to the White House for cues about how to handle this. But there's this indecision inside of the GOP because they're not here really in Washington about whether to move forward with sanctions, to take a harder line against Saudi Arabia or not. Do you risk going against President Trump and his line?
And based on your reporting, Bob, because you are so wired in Washington, what is the calculus from the White House right now? We know that Jared Kushner has a very close relationship with MBS. Are they helping Saudi Arabia through this? Are they helping them concoct the plan, whatever the story is going to be, that it was an accidental death, perhaps, of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi?
White House officials say the president views this not so much through a foreign policy or ideological prism, but through his transactional prism. He sees world politics as something that's about what are you giving the United States, what is the United States getting in return for what it gives. And on Saudi Arabia, whether it's the arms deal, oil, its geopolitical position in the Middle East. He values that. He keeps articulating that privately inside of the West Wing as something he wants to protect, which has made him, even as he lashes out at Ms. Daniels, he's staying relatively in his steady position on Saudi Arabia, not taking any kind of firm position on human rights.
Doris Kearns Goodwin, you study presidential leadership. Does this look like United States presidential leadership? Or would you argue, like Madeleine Albright does, that we are leading down a very different path here, and all the pieces are fitting together towards someone who is trying to make this a dictatorship?
You know, the problem with using words like fascism or dictatorship is I think the pattern of behavior that we're seeing may be leading in that direction. And you just want to be able to persuade other people to look at this president. My argument would be to look at whether he's a leader or not. What does a leader normally do? A leader normally takes blame when things are wrong. A leader normally shares credit when things are right. A leader normally builds a team that's built with people who are strong-minded and can argue with them, and then you get a purpose in that team. A leader normally controls his negative emotions. A leader normally communicates honestly and with truth. And I think if we can just show that he's not necessarily a leader, that's bad enough, rather than putting a label on him yet. When the Mueller investigation comes out, we may well see the rule of law being denied, and then we have to go after him. But right now we have to expand the people who look at him and see that this is not right, what's happening, rather than turning them away by using a term like that.
Okay, so pull back on the term, but every question or every check that you put out there for this president is no.
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm saying, let's just say,
what's the word that we can use?
Well, right,
we can't use certain words, apparently, because he uses any word he wants to use. I understand that you don't want to overreach, but tell us where we are right now in the process of devolving the presidency, if you think that is happening.
I do think the fact that there's no shared political truth, that there are lies, there are fabrications, there are alternate facts, is a really troubling thing. I do think the fact that he is deliberately dividing the country rather than trying to bring us together. I mean, Jeffrey and I were talking about that beforehand. Other presidents may have done that, but this is being done deliberately. What a president normally does. Look at these moments of triumph he had. At the inauguration, he could have tried to bring us together. He didn't. After the Kavanaugh hearings, when he was triumphant, he got the Supreme Court justice he wanted, his party wanted, into the court. And what does he do? He mocks Dr. Ford, and he talks about the Democrats as horrible, horrible people. Even after he won this suit, evidently, the other day over Stormy Daniels, why doesn't he just keep quiet instead of having to call her names? There's a feeling about him that the only joy he ever gets is when he's fighting somebody rather than the exhilaration even of a victory. And that's not an ordinary leader. You should be taking problems and feeling great when something's solved or when you've been victorious, but instead he comes to life when he's arguing with other people and calling them names. So all of those things are not what a leader is, and we have to focus on that. Leadership is what matters, and then we can figure out what to label him as things go down the line, and we may be reaching that point. If he were to do something with the Mueller investigation and stop it, then clearly we have to talk about the rule of law and dictatorship.
Doris Kearns Goodwin, thank you very much. Robert Costa, thank you for your reporting. And still ahead on Morning Joe, Lindsey Graham has been towing the president's line a lot lately. But yesterday, he did not. He had a far tougher position on Saudi Arabia than the administration has. Plus, President Trump has no financial ties to the Saudi kingdom. That is, if you ignore the yacht, the real estate, the long-standing business ties. So why is he claiming something that is so easily disproved? Former CIA director and NBC analyst John Brennan joins us next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.